This is Jerome Corsi, and today it's Tuesday. It's October 24th, 2023. Thank you for joining us on thetruthcentral.com. We're broadcasting podcasts every weekday. Today, my book is coming out this week, this new book, The Truth About Neo-Marxism, Cultural Maoism, and Anarchy. And I'm going to continue to feature it. We'll be doing more publicity on it next week and trying to get some podcasts on it to get the word out. It's the second volume in what I'm calling the Great Awakening trilogy. The first volume was The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change. The first book says that the radical left lies. Climate change, carbon dioxide is not producing global warming. It's a really pretty silly idea, actually. It's a minor molecule in the atmosphere. That's the first book. And it's a lie designed to destroy capitalism. Basically, it's a depopulation movement, thinking that if they can break the back of the industrial state, they can create their new world order, which is move into globalism. And of course, the woke are only an instrumentality of causing the destruction of the capitalist system in the modern industrial state. The oligarchs who control the World Economic Forum, the wealthy individuals in the world, and the multinational corporations will ultimately get rid of the woke as soon as they win. They'll think that they can rule the world and have all the resources of the world with the transhumanism. That'll be the third volume, artificial intelligence, their machines, and perpetual life extension. They'll live forever. That's their ultimate dream, to become God. Now, today I want to get into what this book does is it shows you how Marxism became Neo-Marxism, how it became cultural Maoism, and then anarchy is what they're going to create. They're already in the process of creating anarchy. We're experiencing it right now. And we have economic crash coming. We had a pandemic. Now we've got wars in the Middle East. We've got war in Ukraine. Taiwan is on the brink. China could take Taiwan any day it wants, just like it took Hong Kong. It would be a battle if we decided to engage. And I'm not sure we would. At any rate, this book explains the different world in which the left lives. Phenomenology, their experience of the world is completely different than the traditional Enlightenment Judeo-Christian perception of reality. Now, the section I'm going to begin is talking about a chapter I wrote in the book called The Seductive Logic of the Hegelian Dialectic. Hegel was a philosopher who followed Kant, and Hegel had this idea that we progress through history, and there's a dialectic. There's a thesis, antithesis, and a synthesis, and that's how we advance through history to a higher stage. That's Hegel. He was a German philosopher, and Marx came along, and Marx reinterpreted Hegel. And I'm going to read a quote here from a book called Marx and Satan by Richard Wurmbrand. He says, "It is essential at this point to state emphatically that Marx and his comrades, while anti-God, were not atheists, as present-day Marxists claim to be. That is, while they denounced and reviled God, they hated a God in whom they believed. They challenged not his existence, but his supremacy." That's a critical point, is that Marx knew God existed. He hated God. He was born in 1818 in Prussia under the German Confederation, and he studied at the University of Bonn and Berlin. He became deeply involved in studying Hegel. But when Marx was 25 years old, he married Jenny von Westphalen, a woman 4 years older than him. She was raised in an aristocratic family. So they had 7 children. 2 daughters killed themselves by drinking poison in suicide pacts. 3 of their children died of malnutrition. And in London, Marx and his family lived in miserable poverty, mainly because Karl Marx preferred to borrow money from family and friends and send Jenny to do the same with her family and friends rather than work. He had an illegitimate child by a maid, but said Friedrich Engels was the father, a lie that Engels repudiated on his deathbed. And Karl Marx sent his illegitimate son to live with foster parents, cutting off all contact with him. So he was not a particularly nice guy in any way, shape, or form. And he was a recluse. He rarely washed. He was dirty. He lived a pretty miserable life working in the London libraries, writing his Das Kapital. So Paul Kenger, who has written some excellent books on communism, in his 2020 book, The Devil and Karl Marx, Communism's Long March of Death, Deception, and Infiltration, he gave a graphic description of how Karl Marx refused to work. It would have been nice if Karl had merely gotten a job. This is what Kenger wrote. Naturally, those who suffered most from Marx's refusal to secure work was his family, which was destitute from his laziness. His wife and kids lacked money, food, a steady roof over their heads, even medical attention. He demanded more and more from his parents until they could no longer give more and insisted on some tough love for their selfish child. His personal traits were appalling, and he was a miserable human being. At any rate, he had this manuscript was Das Kapital, and he was the pamphlet, really, Communist Manifesto, which Engels co-authored with him, is perhaps one of his better known works. Das Kapital is a dense work. It's very difficult to read. That's Karl Marx looking good. He's prettied up in that picture. That's, I think, rarely looked so good as that in reality. Hegel felt that Aristotle's politics was correct, that a constitutional monarchy was the highest form of government. And Aristotle studied constitutions. Aristotle created the three branches of government, three co-equal: executive, legislative, and judicial. But when Marx came along, Marx decided that his hatred of God, his hatred of religion, his determination to destroy private property, which he didn't particularly experience or believe in or work, which he didn't want to do. These are aspects of what go through his entire writings. So essentially what he called for, Marx's most famous characterizations of religion was a tool of oppression. So, for instance, he wrote, the wretchedness of religion is at once an expression of and a protest against real wretchedness. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of a soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. That's where that paragraph comes from, that opium of the people. And this came out of one of his writings on Hegel, and criticizing and arguing with Hegel on some technical points. And so what Marx wrote also is the abolition of religion is the illusionary happiness of the people, is a demand for their true happiness. The call to abandon illusions about their condition is called to abandon a condition which requires illusions. Thus, the critique of religion is the critique in embryo of the veil of tears of which religion is the halo. So the attack against religion is fundamental to Marx's points. Now, Bertrand Russell did some brilliant writing about Karl Marx. I'm going to read just a little bit of it. And he wrote, for instance, this Bertrand Russell, the British philosopher. While the Marxist account is Hegelian in method, it repudiates Hegel's insistence on the spiritual nature of the world. Marx said that Hegel had to be put upside down, and this he proceeded to do by adopting materialistic doctrines of the 18th century. So Marx took God and all references to spirituality out of Hegel and he was authoritarian. So Bertrand Russell also wrote, in the social field itself, the oversimplification of explaining everything by dialectical materialism provides some rather odd consequences. For if you do not agree with the Marxist doctrine, you are deemed not to be on the side of progress. The term of distinction reserved for those who have not been visited by the new revelation is the word reactionary. Literally, the inference is that you are working against progress in a backward direction. The dialectic process, however, ensures that you will be eliminated in due course, for progress must win in the end. This then becomes the rationale for violent removal of nonconformist elements. There's a strong messianic streak in the political philosophy of Marxism. As the founder of an earlier creed had put it, he who is not with us is against us. This is clearly not the principle of a democratic doctrine. So Bertrand Russell understood very clearly that that Marxism was inherently authoritarian, and that it only could destroy. It could only basically destroy. The German word Marx used was hard to pronounce in German, but it was a word that meant abolition. And what he was trying to do is abolish the existing society. And he believed that in 1848 we would have world revolutions, which in Europe there were a lot of revolutions. They did not term communists. His whole idea that you would have a rise of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie, the landowners, and the capitalists did not happen. And Marx essentially had a failed theory. The communist revolution came, it was not challenging the industrialized Europe of 1848, but in peasant Russia. One of the new 2017 books by a good historian, Sean McKeegan, revealed substantial revisions of traditional analyses of the Russian Revolution, primarily informed by access to Russian archives not previously open to scholars. McEwen presented a well-documented and convincing case that Germany financed Lenin's return to Russia from exile in Switzerland. Germany's interest in Lenin stemmed from their hope that Lenin would capitalize on the fall of Tsar Nicholas II to get Russia to pull out of World War I. McKeegan noted that the founder of the Bolshevik Party, Lenin, was an afterthought in the 1905 revolution and, quote, barely worth the attention of the Tsarist police agents until his return to Russia in April 1917, after an absence of nearly 2 decades. So when Lenin returned to Russia, he essentially did not follow the Marxist scheme. Lenin and the Bolsheviks played no role worth mentioning in the fall of the Tsar. This is what McKeegan wrote. An unexpected gift of fate that in mockery of Marxist pretensions of historical determinism, they were completely surprised that the Tsar abdicated. So the takeover in Russia of communism had nothing to do with Marxist political theories. McKeegan emphasized that far from being a product of social revolution, class struggle, economic development, or other inexorable historical forces foreseen in the Marxist theory, the Russian Revolution was made by identifiable means pursuing their own advantages. It was therefore properly subject to value judgment. Okay, so what happened with Russia is really a refutation of Marxist theory. That's what we're seeing here. And Marxist theory was considered to be failed until it came along with Gramsci, and Gramsci resurrected it. Gramsci was an Italian communist who said you've got to attack the culture of capitalism. At its heart is not wanting to work. At its heart is the desire to be able to somehow or other elevate life to a higher level, and work being looked at as low, demeaning, materialistic. And again, the denial of our material nature and the evolution of this advanced human being is a fundamental concept that starts with Hegel and pervades through Marx, with Marx stripping out God out of the equation. What you end up with is a conviction that we are going to advance through history, through this historical dialectic. And the dialectic demands the abolition of the existing to create the new. So it is fundamentally a negation. And in negation, it is destruction. So, and the whole idea of this authoritarianism leads to a kind of scientism. In other words, the historical determination that we're going to advance is one that is built into the Marxist and Hegelian formula. So therefore, they feel that they can create the future by imagining it, by positing it, by scientism. In other words, this whole attempt to replace religion as an authority in all questions, to advance it with scientists, not scientists who are studying fact as in the Enlightenment, but scientists who are positing the rules for the future and directing how we should behave. So the perspective is that this man of action who Hegel posited is one who is supposed to come forward and birth the new era. And the new era demands totalitarianism because you cannot tolerate the ideas of the old, which are reactionary, and imprisoning. So again, there's a combination of mysticism, magic, wishing it to be, an influence ultimately of Rousseau, that we are born free, but everywhere we are in chains because of the state, because of the society, culture, and that we need to free ourselves from all of these inhibitions, including a belief in God. So it's a very bizarre basis, but it gets built into the heart of this woke culture, because woke culture comes out of this thinking. The woke believe they're creating the new future that will be a utopia, and they have to destroy the present. They believe that it requires the blurring of boundaries and the imagining of new futures. Like John Lennon, imagine there's no God, imagine there's no boundaries, that we are all citizens of the world. These are the ideas where the new world order, globalism, is viewed as the ultimate end, and the globalists view that the only the best, the oligarchs, those who are superhuman, Übermensch, as Nietzsche said, above just the mere condition of human beings, Übermensch, above men, they would triumph. And that's consistent with Hegel's idea that the great men move history forward. It's a very bizarre set of concepts. Chris, would you like to comment?
You mentioned the demeaning of religion. That's a prime tenet to any kind of authoritarian government, because the idea is to worship the state, worship man instead of worship God or an entity or some kind of religious doctrine. Obviously, the Soviets and the Chinese were huge enforcers of this sort of thing, and they still are today. As a matter of fact, China is still persecuting religious people as we speak. That's something that needs to be stopped. The other issue is that's what's happening in this country. People don't realize how subtle this has been over the last 50 to 60 years. It used to be where you couldn't insult religions here and there. Then subtly, maybe the 70s onward, you could start making fun of churches and religions, and then kind of turn young people off of them through the entertainment and the culture by telling them, well, church is uncool. If you go to church, you're one of those really stuffy people, and you don't want to be like that. You want to be like these cool people who tell you that church is bad, a religion is bad. And this all crosses right over into a more radical point of view 50 years later. At least it would have been more radical in the 1970s, but now 50, 60 years later, we're seeing this as almost the norm. Whereas it's almost like those of us who do follow religion are the rebels now. If you think about it,
it's in a sense, it's one of the points I want to make at this juncture here is that what we're experiencing today, this disorder, this disarray, is intentional. That
sure.
the whole culture has moved towards, the Democratic Party has become a neo-Marxist party. And the way the Federal Reserve is managing the economy right now, the governments are creating inflation because they have such massive debts that they can't afford to pay the interest unless they can just print the money or make the currency so worthless that they're paying off with dollars that have less purchasing power in order to pay off previous debts. They're paying off previous debts cheaply, not dollar for dollar in the same purchasing power. And as I look around, just to comment about what's going on in the economy, I continue to predict that we're going to have a massive crash. I continue to say that gold is going to exceed $2,000 an ounce by a lot. And I do want to have a segue here to recommend everybody get a copy of the book. It's How the Coming Global Crash Created a Historic Gold Rush. I'm an author. I've been writing a lot lately. I'm trying to get all this as much out as I can. You get a free copy of How the Coming Global Crash Will Create an Historic Gold Rush by calling this toll-free number at Swiss America and talk to Swiss America. You're finding, I'll cover probably starting again next week. I'm going to feature the book this week, but next week I'm going to cover again that the foreclosures are coming because people are getting behind on car payments, getting credit card payments, car, home, credit card. These are things that are going to quickly end up like a subprime mortgage crisis did, where people are going to lose cars, lose homes, lose their credit. The toll-free number to get a free copy of this book is 1-800-519-6268. Let me repeat that. Free copy of How the Coming Crash Will Create an Historic Gold Rush. Dean Heskin, my co-author, who is the head of Swiss America, call 1-800-519-6268. Okay, I'll cover a couple more points and then we'll wrap up. I want to put this whole Marxist evolution, Russian Revolution, the 17th and 18th centuries, Enlightenment was the age of reason. The Enlightenment was an intellectual and philosophic movement that followed advances in science. Enlightenment thinkers were confident the development of the human race would be continued progress through technical achievements. And in a sense, we've seen this happen. Look at the computerization, the internet that we're on right now, the tools we have for communication, which were unimaginable even as recently as World War II, even as recently as 30 years ago. But when the two world wars ravaged the 20th century, these postmodernist theories began to question the value of absolute values, objective knowledge, and they felt that this whole Enlightenment had ended up in Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin. So the postmodernists began to see Kant as the first decisive break with the Enlightenment and the first major step towards postmodernism, because Kant began to discuss that our phenomenology, our experience of the world is relative. We experience the world through senses, and everybody's senses are different. Now, Kant did hold there was an a priori, and it did distinguish him from the postmodernists, but what's happened is the French intellectuals who are postmodernists began to see everything as arbitrary. That what we have is a narrative. We have a narrative about the Iraqi war. We have a narrative about narrative about the American government. And they try to deconstruct to get to the reality, but the reality is very subjective. In other words, the boundaries are blurred because in postmodernist thought, the objective perception of reality is impossible. There's no absolute meaning to any specific person's perception of reality. Reality is what it means to that person. So if you think that your gender is not identical to your sex, you have a right to do that. And it means in postmodernism, we begin to live in almost a schizophrenic world in which everybody's reality has to be taken to be reflective of who they are, and we're supposed to use the pronouns they want us to use to describe them, even if it seems bizarre in terms of Enlightenment thinking. It is bizarre. But the point is that also from Marxism and from the early 20th century, the Stalin-Kalin theme that the way to break the back of the United States was to focus on racism, that we were a slave country, that we had slaves, the Constitution was written in order to preserve the rights of slaveholders, and therefore the entire system is corrupt and needs to be destroyed. Now, this is the basis we get today of the woke attempt to want to destroy the United States, not to tolerate. We've raised generations now, maybe 2 generations of youth who come to see America as evil. And again, this perversion, America fought the Civil War not to end slavery, but over states' rights. But by the end, Abraham Lincoln had certainly turned it into emancipation. Emancipation Proclamation, the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln redefined America as all people are created equal. And that redefinition has persisted. Now, the equality does not mean equality in results, but the left focuses on inequality produced by capitalism is inherently racist. These are deep themes. And the reason I wrote this book is that if you take the time to really get through it, you can see how bizarre it is, how twisted it is, how, in fact, it can only destroy. This ideology cannot create. It can destroy. It's very good at destroying. It's very bad at constructing. We're going to wrap it up today, and we'll carry it on tomorrow. I want to do a deep dive into this book because I think it's critical that you really understand where woke comes from and where it's going. It's the only way you'll be able to really counter it and defeat it. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. Today is Tuesday. It's October 24th, 2023. In the end, God always wins. God will win here too. God created this place despite what Karl Marx says. God does rule. And as the Lord's Prayer says, in heaven, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I think that's the fundamental reality of human beings, is to acknowledge God. And in the end, God will win. God created this place. He can unplug it. He can disappear any instant God decides it should. I think 2 Chronicles 7:14 is the solution. We need to get on our knees and ask God to forgive us for letting God be taken out of our school, out of our hearts, our public square, millions of babies killed in the womb. I do believe God will hear our prayer and heal our land. But we're going to go through the judgment of God that's begun. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. Thank you for joining us on thetruthcentral.com. We'll be back every weekday. God bless.